Gosh, what an absolutely
That's
massive
why we
play to
all
start the
wanna
game.
Sit
Is he
down.
going to get
Rid
the
of
one
the
shot? He
samurai
gets the
one.
one hit KO!
Hey everybody, welcome to Pokemon Feet, Pokemon facts, Easter eggs, and trivia. I'm going to try to teach you something you don't know about the Pokemon series, but if I fail, whatever. Let's do it. Let's start this week off back in Generation 1. Did you know that Pokemon Red, Green, and Blue versions were all released in Japan? Well, the red and green versions in Japan had completely different sprites than the ones we're familiar with from that generation. Blue version was released later with improved sprites to more accurately match Ken Sugimori's original artwork. When it came to the game's international release, however, Nintendo used the improved Blue version sprites and released the games as just Pokemon Red and Blue, getting rid of Green version altogether. The sprites would once again be improved worldwide when Pokemon Yellow was released. Strangely enough though, the back sprites of all of the Pokemon remained the same throughout all 4 Generation 1 games. We've talked about Blossom's interesting color scheme before, but we never got a chance to look at her sister, Vileplume. Despite being based on the Rafflesia arnoldi, a foul-smelling flower that is incapable of forming chlorophyll or using photosynthesis, Vileplume is capable of learning the moves Aromatherapy, Sweet Scent, and Synthesis, and its regular ability is Chlorophyll. Wow. We haven't covered a whole lot of glitches in Pokemon Feet yet, so here's my chance to change that. In Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald versions, there is a glitch you can do with the move Dive, which will literally allow you to walk on water. While entering an underwater cave, if the player presses the B button at the right time, the game will ask if the player wants to resurface while on top of the entrance. Resurfacing from the entrance to Seafloor Cavern or the Route 104 entrance to Marine Cave will cause the player to resurface on a rock tile instead of a water tile, from which the player may then proceed to walk across the water. In Emerald version, this can actually lead to something kinda cool. Performing this glitch on the entrance to Marine Cave on Route 129 gives the player access to an area normally inaccessible in the game by a wall of rocks. This would be neat if there was actually something to see out here. Sadly, an invisible wall at the edge of the map prevents adventurous players from traveling too far out of bounds. I'm sure we all know the struggle of trying to catch legendaries. I mean, I can't tell you how many times my party's been wiped out while I'm just standing there throwing Pokeballs over and over again, hoping to catch the damn thing. Well, in Fire Red and Leaf Green, Sableye is completely immune to all of Wild Mewtwo's attacks. So you can just sit there and throw Pokeballs until you're broke, at your leisure. Male Nidoran and female Nidoran are pretty strange. They were the first Pokemon ever to have a distinguished gender sign, even before Pokemon had genders assigned to them at all. This changed, however, with the introduction of Generation 2, when Game Freak decided to give genders to all Pokemon next to their level. But, when they first made this move, they forgot to remove the original gender signs from the Nidoran's names, and thus the signs were doubled up for these Pokemon. This was fixed in future games, though. A little piece of trivia for you all. What's the only Pokemon both Ash and Misty owned? This is a tough one since the Pokemon only lasted 1 episode each, but in case you wanted to know, in the episode Hook, Line, and Stinker, both Ash and Misty caught a Sea King during a fishing competition. If you've never watched the episode and this Sea King thing is news to you, it's because under the park's rules, all trainers had to release the Pokemon they caught after the competition ends, so they were never used in battle. But while we're at it, this episode also did 2 other interesting things. First, it introduced a new type of Pokeball known as a Lake Ball, and Ash mentions 2 real-world animals during the competition, those being bass and catfish. Remember how Raichu is basically like a walking nightlight? Well, the amount of electricity it stores in its body in order to allow this to happen is up for debate. Some of Raichu's Pokedex entries state that the Pokemon can store and discharge up to 100,000 volts of electricity at once. However, in Pokemon Stadium, Raichu's entry states that it can only discharge 10,000 volts. Let me put this into a different perspective really quick. Have you ever heard of the Tough Mudder race? They have an obstacle at the end where participants run through an area of wires that shock you, some of them containing 10,000 volts of electricity. If people are willingly running through that, could it even be that strong? In fact, you can theoretically generate up to 25,000 volts of electricity by dragging your feet across a carpet, although a typical carpet shock ranges from a few hundred to a few thousand volts of electricity. I think it's safe to say the 10,000 volts entry was a mistake. I mean, can you imagine trying to knock anything unconscious from carpet shock? Yeah, didn't think so. Now guys, this next fact I think is pretty neat, but if you watch the anime, this is definitely a spoiler, so avert your ears here. I'll include an annotation to the next fact if you really want to skip this one. Now back to the action. Incredibly, it's taken the Pokemon anime 871 episodes to finally reference an approximated numbered date of the Pokemon world's present time. In the 72nd episode of the X and Y series, Ash and gang stumble upon a man named Cole in an abandoned house. They find an old picture of Cole, dated July 14th, 1758. As soon as Ash sees this, he comments on how the picture is from over 200 years ago. Whoa. So now we know Ash's adventures take place past the year 1958, and presumably prior to 2058, because he didn't say the photo was over 300 years old. Interestingly enough, in the real world, however, camera captures didn't exist until the mid-1820s, which means either the Pokemon world is more advanced than the real world.
There's the data. Now I'll transfer it onto this floppy.
Or the writers made a mistake. Oh yeah, and that means Cole is actually dead all along. If you pay close attention throughout the episode, you'll realize that Cole doesn't have a shadow except for in his flashbacks, alluding to the fact that he's really just a ghost himself. Okay, after some intense facts like that one, I like to calm down the episode with some, relatively useless information. Did you know that there is only one Pokemon whose national Pokedex number is the same number as the level at which that Pokemon evolves from its pre-evolution? Any guesses? The answer is Raticate. Rattata evolves at level 20, and Raticate's national Pokedex number is 20. All good things must come to an end. But since Pokemon Feet isn't one of those things, I'll include one last fact for you all. Remember buying Heart Gold and Soul Silver and receiving the Pokewalker in the box? Well, you probably thought that this thing was a relatively poor pedometer, seeing as it was made of plastic and accompanied a quote-unquote children's video game. However, this is 100% not the case. According to an Iowa State University study, the Pokewalker is one of the more accurate pedometers on the market, substantially beating out some of the other leading brands in terms of reduced step counting error. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. I hope you had a good time on this week's episode of Pokemon Feet. If you liked it, feel free to leave me a like or a comment. Both of those are pretty freaking amazing. And if you think you can put up with me again, feel free to maybe even hit that subscribe button. I don't know, up to you, but it'd be pretty cool. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you guys had a good time, and I hope to see you guys back here next week on another episode of Pokemon Feet.
Who's that Pokemon?
Foot.
Scyther! What?
Foot.